I think we'll make a start, Andres. So welcome
So,
to everyone that's joined on today. We appreciate you putting some time aside to join this discussion. Very much looking forward to this one. It is Mental Health Awareness Week. We do recognise there is a theme to that of community, and we will bring elements of that into this discussion. But I think, moreover, the reason we've chosen this topic is because it's very important as a topic, and there's a lot of research out there between the links between physical and mental health. So whilst these awareness weeks and days are fantastic for creating awareness, we think this is an important topic that we'd like to unpack. And I have just the person to do it with me as a co-host. Andreas, do you want to give yourself a quick intro?
yeah, so I'm Andres Fonseca. I'm the CEO and one of the founders at Thrive. I'm also a consultant psychiatrist. For those of you, I'm sure everybody knows, but basically it means that I'm a medic. I qualified as a doctor first. I was a GP for a few years, and then I became a specialist in psychiatry. So for me, this link between mental and physical health is actually quite important. I think that there's an artificial divide in our minds. We're just naturally dualistic, and we think about them as separate categories, but in reality they are fundamentally linked. So we know that for you to have a healthy mind, you need a healthy brain, and a healthy brain is part of your body, it's part of uh, it's part of your whole health is both brain health, body health is kind of the same thing. So yeah, I think this is not surprising that there is a very deep link between these two ideas because they are one of the same, to be honest.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andres. And yeah, so my name's Rich. I head up the customer success team at Thrive. Passionate about both these subjects, although kind of Andreas has articulated it can be viewed holistically as health. In my time outside of Thrive, I am actually qualifying to be a PT outside of the work that I do as well, which is supporting our customers with their mental health. So I've got an interest from sort of both sides, and as someone who sort of actively participates in some of the activities that we'll go through. So thank you for joining. We'll run through the agenda now, and we'll talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. So broadly, it's commonly well, there's a great amount of awareness on the relationship between the two, but we're going to unpack those in a little bit more detail. With the benefit of Andreas, we're going to be looking at some of the links between physical activity and mental health. We'll break down as well. It's a subtle, but I think a difference worth emphasizing the difference between physical activity and exercise. But then we'll go on to look at the impact of mental health conditions on your levels of physical activity. We've got a few research studies thrown in there. And then we'll bring it back to the audience to kind of support your fellow attendees in some practical ways that you might encourage yourself if you're not sort of engaging in physical activity or exercise to get active. And then we'll reflect on those. And of course, because we are here representing Thrive, we will give you a heads up on how to access our service if you do have access to it through your employer or through your insurance partner, occupational health provider, whoever provides that access to you. So from experience, we find not always can everyone stay on till the end of the webinars. We hope you do and you enjoy the discussion. But for those that may be experiencing more challenges at the moment, we just wanted to highlight a few resources that are available to you. Firstly, there is the Thrive app itself. So those of you that have access, you can scan the QR code here. This is a digital tool to access mental health support. Your employer or the organization that provides it will provide you with an access code, but it's anonymous, it's confidential. So I want to give people that may not have downloaded this yet, but are a customer or an employee of one of our customers, the opportunity to download the app. Just scan that QR code and you can follow that process to sign up and get yourself on there. Then we have a selection of some familiar, certainly familiar to us in the work that we do, but some great organizations that are out there to support people's mental health wherever you are and wherever they may meet you. So again, take a screenshot or whatever is best for you. But there are some numbers there that you can access if you are in need of support or you know someone that might be in need of support. Okay. Cool. So when we were thinking about putting this session together, I thought it was, as I've kind of alluded to on one of the previous slides, important to kind of frame this discussion. And what I mean by that is making this point of a separation between two things that are linked but are a little bit different. So when we refer to physical activity, which is how we've labeled this webinar, as the description says here, any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that require energy expenditure. You can tell I didn't write that. But really, we're talking about things like walking, you might be going up the stairs, just physical activity, not structured exercise, planned, coordinated. You think of various different things and exercise fads that are around. But we want to make this accessible because we recognize, particularly when we start to talk about some of the clinical presentations of anxiety and depression, in severe cases of that, trying to encourage someone to engage in various different levels of strenuous exercise might not be suitable and applicable to that individual. And in many cases, it's just about getting moving, finding something that you enjoy, and then trying to incorporate that into your lifestyle. So I just wanted to give a bit of context to these two things that we will probably use interchangeably. I probably will anyway. But there is a difference between the two as we approach this through the discussion. Okay. Cool. So you've kind of started the ball rolling in your intro, and Andreas, around this link between physical activity and mental health, or physical and mental health. And there is lots of research out there between the two. But what I wanted us to do in this session, and we've done numerous webinars on different sort of thematic areas. And this is definitely less is more in terms of slides. So we're going to try and broaden out the conversation, because sometimes you find yourself running through it at the last minute, trying to rush through the slides that you produce. So hopefully we've got plenty of time for discussion. So if I take us into, I guess, a more clinical context, and this is the question we're sort of posing and pondering on. So if an individual would be managing or is managing a depressive disorder, how might that impact their levels of physical activity, perhaps desire to do physical activity? What might present, Andreas, and what are some of the considerations that you think are relevant to kind of highlight?
Yeah, no. So depression is characterized by a series of symptoms. It's interesting that if you read the definition of depression, you can have, so low mood is obviously one of the things that comes to mind when you think about depression. But you can satisfy the criteria for the diagnosis of depression without low mood, which is interesting in itself. So some of the most salient symptoms are anhedonia and anergia. So anhedonia means that you stop enjoying the things that you used to enjoy. So the things that you used to like doing, they stop providing joy. So that intrinsic motivation that you get to do something, like, I don't know, go out to meet with friends or go out for walks, whatever you used to enjoy, any activities, stop being so enjoyable. So that's one thing. And the other one is the anergia. What I said is that means that you feel lacking in energy. So you feel tired all the time. And that, obviously, those two things in particular will have an impact on your physical activity. It's quite evident how they would do so. So the illness itself robs you of this energy, and also robs you of the enjoyment that you may have from these things, and very often leads to isolation and to not really seeing the point, because you're also quite pessimistic. You don't see the point in doing certain things, and also you can be quite hopeless. So you don't feel that by doing any of these things can be improved. So there's that pessimism and hopelessness robs you of perhaps the motivation that you would quite naturally come to you in normal circumstances. And that's going to definitely have an impact on your physical health activity. And the interesting thing is that we know from the research is that becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. So the less you move, the less you participate in these activities that you used to enjoy, even the more depressed you become, and the less likely you are to enjoy them, the less likely you are to regain your energy. So even though your body in that, or your mind, or both, they're telling you not to move, not to do anything. It's like, what's the point? Is the kind of feeling that you get. In fact, that is making the whole thing worse. And if you're able to break that cycle in some kind of way, we know that you're very much more likely to recover. So it's doing things that you feel are quite pointless and costly in order to regain that enjoyment, in order to regain that energy. So you're feeling lacking in energy, and the last thing in your mind is to move, but actually what gives you back your energy is to move. Uh, which is an interesting conundrum in which that's kind of part of the illness itself, and that's why it can be quite it can self-perpetuate by virtue of those kinds of vicious cycles that set themselves up. Yeah.
One of the things you said, Andreas, there around stop enjoying the things that you used to enjoy. Do we know
Yes.
why that is, or what's going on there, or is it quite a complex thing to put it
It,
to one particular thing?
it's quite complex. I think it's a nuanced situation. So you have to, when you think about depression, you have to think about, why do we have a condition that is depression? What's going on there? So why do we become unwell in that particular way, right? So what function does sadness have? What difficulties may you be experiencing as a result of the depression? Um,
Mm,
eh, if you sorry, just to go back to the sadness idea. So if you're just feeling, what is the function of sadness? Sadness is an emotion that you get when something happens that is adverse in some way. So some kind of a challenge, some kind of usually associated with some kind of a loss,
yeah.
and it gives you, it's a very unpleasant thing, and it's a powerful signal to tell you that perhaps you should try and avoid that in the future, right? So that's kind of the value of sadness, is to tell you something bad has happened, and let's try and avoid it for the future. It's just a very negative signal that you receive, very distressing feeling that you receive, to try and avoid that in the future. So what happens if that goes wrong? If you feel sad in the wrong circumstance, so there's no real, there's a perceived situation which is adverse or negative, that
Mm,
then impacts your mood and gives you this negative feedback as to, we need to avoid this, we need to sort of figure this out. So it gets maybe triggered in an inappropriate situation, and also once it's triggered, that reaction, that normal thing that you use, in order to sort of improve your survival, then gets hijacked, and it becomes excessive, and then quite difficult to escape.
mm,
An example I will give you from physical health might be an allergic reaction. So why do we have allergic reactions, right? That is your immune system trying to sort of defend you from a foreign body, from infection, from something that is, trying to sort of affect your body, your physical health. Your body is defending itself, but it does so excessively and inappropriately. In depression, we have a similar presentation. It's a normal system that it has a very fundamental role that
mm,
gets hijacked, that stops working as intended, and then we have this situation, and that's why we end up in this similar to, for example, an allergic reaction, in which it can compound itself, it can make itself worse, and then you need to intervene, and you need to do something to escape that situation. In depression, it can be a similar thing, in which
yeah.
something that has a clear normal function has stopped working in the way it's intended. Yeah.
Got you. Got you. Just something pick up. Sorry, something that you said there. I think you said, what is the purpose of the emotion sadness? I think sometimes just thinking of emotions like that, there is a purpose, right?
Yes.
Whether it could be unhealthy because it's prolonged and protracted, and the triggering event doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily a suitable
Yeah,
reaction.
it's not proportionate, let's say. Yeah,
Proportionate to the word.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So thinking about that in from a perspective of depression,
yeah.
anxiety, I believe, is a little bit different potentially in terms of how it may impact those levels of physical activity with that kind of lack of energy and depression potentially.
Yes.
But for an individual that's experiencing anxiety disorder, how might that manifest for them?
Yeah, so anxiety also has a role. As anxiety tends to mean more anticipatory, so more before something happens or anticipating that something may happen. So the role of anxiety is to warn you that something may go wrong in the future, and we need to act. We need to be prepared. That's kind
Mm,
of its role. So whereas sadness, and then the pathological presentation of sadness might be depression, let's say. In this case, in anxiety, the role of it is to warn you that something may happen in the future that might go wrong, and that you need to take action to avoid it. And normally we understand this as the stress reaction, and we normally associate that with the the flight or fight or sometimes freeze response. Yeah.
mm,
Um, so that's what it's originally intended to do. So again, we have a situation in which it gets triggered inappropriately for whatever reason. The threshold might be the wrong threshold. You might be going back to my allergic reaction example or metaphor. You have something that should not cause a reaction in your body. You should not cause that immune response, but it does cause it. In this case, you have something that you are reacting against that you feel is very, very threatening, but maybe if you look at it more objectively, the threat is not that big. It gets triggered inappropriately, it gets triggered excessively. And the thing that it tends to do, because it's a warning system, it tends to force you to avoid
mm,
things, to avoid situations, to protect you from something that may go wrong if you do X, right? So in how might it affect that your physical exercise? By preventing you from doing things. From if I, for example, let's imagine that I become very anxious about going to the supermarket because it could be very crowded. It could be I felt trapped. I feel it's difficult to breathe. I maybe I had a panic attack. Something like that has happened. So I learned that that is a difficult situation. So I'm going to avoid it now. Obviously, I'm less likely to go out of the home. I'm less likely to undertake those activities, and obviously that is reducing the range of physical activities or that I'm doing. So we're not talking about exercise, as you said, it's physical activity. So maybe just leaving the home is prevented because I am anxious about a X, Y, or Z activity that I used to quite happily undertake in the past. Does that
mm.
make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a not contrary, but is there a potentially an opposite effect that if that stress response is being triggered and you do have that sort of adrenaline surging in your body and the cortisol, for those that may be more inclined, it could almost act as a fuel because I want this feeling, I need to expel that unpleasant feeling, and by doing so, I complete, as they say, the stress cycle.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very valid point. So yeah, so the normal response for anxiety. So you're discussing it with how continued stress might become pathological and may have impact on your physical health, which we know
Mm,
it does. Apart from your mental health, yeah, again because they are linked, they are fundamentally linked, and I believe they're not that separate as we think them to be, right? So they're kind of one and the same, fundamentally. So yeah, so the body is preparing to undertake physical activity. So the response was designed to do those two things fundamentally. So am I going to fight this predator, this menace, this threat, or am I going to run away from it? Those
mm,
two things require intense exercise. If you think about it, require intense physical activity. Yeah.
yeah.
So my body is prepared. So it's mobilizing all its resources in order to undertake this extraneous physical activity. But in the
Mm,
modern world, the response is being triggered by not by something that is not a predator, but something that is not like a physical threat. It may be triggered by something that is happening at work, or it may be triggered by something that is happening at home, or you get a stroppy letter from the bank saying that you owe so many pounds to the credit card or something like that. there's some financial anxiety that creeps in.
Yeah.
The response, so the natural response that you get, that you've been prepared to evolution to have, is preparing to do physical activity. You cannot do any physical activity. So the
Yeah.
signal that you're sending is like you're having to undertake the third possibility, which is the most difficult possibility of all the three. So if we cannot fight and we cannot flee, we have to freeze, right? So we have to freeze, and again, naturally, we would be trying to become as small as possible. So basically, trying to sort of become invisible, so that whatever threat is out there doesn't see us pass us by. So that's the third response, which is probably the least likely, because that means that you haven't dealt with the problem at all, and that is still lurking around in the background, and then you're still having to have some kind of a response. So you're still trying to sort of avoid, isolate, stop your activity, stop your activity, stop your activity. How do you overcome this? Okay, so you're not really doing it directly in response of the threat. But if you do the exercise, you do complete that cycle that you were mentioning, you are actually doing the thing that, the response is meant to elicit, right? And by doing so, you're actually sending a message to your whole system that the problem is been dealt with. I did the physical activity that is expected for me to do, and I came the other side of it unscathed. I am okay. So again, without going into the whole hormone cascade or anything else, in a very simplistic way, I'm trying to sort of explain why that is, that by doing this exercise in response to the stress may be a good thing to do, may be conducive of closing that cycle, and may give your whole body, brain, body, everything else, the response, the signal that, yes, it's been dealt with. I've successfully navigated this threat.
Got you. And one more follow-on question, and I asked this knowing that you have to treat everyone as an individual, so sort of broad brush answers might not be possible, but just thinking about so say exercise for an individual that's experiencing sort of prolonged periods of stress, maybe anxiety, is helping them manage their symptoms, but presumably it has a range of effectiveness of actually sorting out the underlying issue, right? So is that where something like a more cognitive base, maybe a talking therapy situation may be applicable, because you can manage symptoms, but if that, I don't know, let's just say it's my appraisal of a situation that could be thought about in a different way. Actually, exercise is not going to help me there. It's only going to get me to a certain level of managing symptoms rather than it can help in that cognitive discussion that might be going on.
Yeah, no, and that's a valid point, and those skills are very valuable to gain, absolutely. But we do know that one of the most important components of the therapy is not just necessarily understanding why you're reacting in a particular way to what you're reacting, but also sort of regulating your response by being exposed to it and by completing those cycles. That gives you a feeling, which is learned, it becomes less intellectual and more instinctive, that you can actually deal with these situations. You're more capable, you have the resources to manage through these difficult times. And it is only by doing not just the cognitive work, as trying to sort of understand how you're perceiving the situations and how that might lead you to perhaps that threshold that we said that maybe gets triggered inappropriately, or excessively, that threshold for anxiety, for stress, that there is, how threatening is this really? Is this really as catastrophic as as I kind of seem to believe? Is this really true? To what extent, right? So just probing those questions can be very useful, but it's also very useful to then do the actual experience. And also we know that without the experimental side of the therapy, the actual putting yourself in difficult situations progressively but also learning how to regulate your stress response, which may very well be done thanks to exercise. You see what I mean? Because you do complete those cycles, so you feel more, you feel it's resolved. And by feeling it's resolved, you feel more in control. By feeling more in control, you're more able to challenge those beliefs that you may have. So it kind of feeds off each other. So it's not, I don't think you can do one without the other. But if you have to choose, I'm going to be very, maybe even controversial here. If you have to choose, you would probably start with the exercise. You see what I mean? You'll probably start with the thing that you're finding it hard to do, like for example, trying to get out of the house might be a very important component, rather than just purely examine your thoughts.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to start with the examining your thoughts, and that's the right place to start, because otherwise you're not going to be able to mobilize, and you're not going to be able to do the other things. So sometimes the first step requires for you to have a better understanding of what's going on, so that you motivate yourself and you trust your therapist, for example, to get you to the next stage, which is probably quite painful to you. Either, is in the case of depression because you need to act against your instinct. I'm very tired. Why should I move? Right? What is the point? Right? And or I'm very worried about the situation. I don't really want to go into it because it feels very threatening. So maybe that the understanding that it's maybe not as threatening as you think it is might get you out the door and take the first step. Yeah.
Thank you, Andres. We're going to move on. So actually, one of the things I promised myself before I came on this webinar is I'd use less ums, but I don't think I'm managing to do that. So we'll see today. How physical inactivity can increase the risk of mental health disorders. So ahead of this, I was having a look at some of the literature and research, and actually the study that we're going to bring to you here. Just get this up. So this was conducted in Spain, and it involved a cohort of around 5,000 individuals. These were aged between 15 and 35, so younger people in Spanish society. And it was exploring the relationship between levels of physical activity and the prevalence of chronic anxiety, depression, and other disorders, other mental health challenges. And I think there's some, aside from a general observation, and I'll probably invite you, Andres, to sort of give a few comments on the different sort of groups, if you like, the inactives, the walkers. Generally, I think it's a safe assumption that increased physical activity does result in a reduced prevalence of these conditions and challenges within this cohort that we're talking about. But I thought and this is something we picked up on yesterday, the relationship between doing nothing, being inactive, and just walking, as you picked up, Andreas, has quite an impact on people's experience of their mental health.
Yes, I mean that tends to be the highest hurdle. And as we said, I mean, so if you look at the inactives, you don't really know whether it's cause and effect. And in these studies, it's quite difficult to say because of the two things that we said at the very beginning when we were looking at how would developing depression lead you to being less active. And I think we have an answer for that. How would anxiety lead you to be less active? I think we also have an answer for that. So you may find yourself in the inactive category because the primary problem is maybe you develop depression or anxiety, if that makes sense, right? It could also be causal. It could be because you're less active, then you're more prone to developing anxiety or depression. This study in particular, I don't think helps us resolve that. We do know that it seems to be protective. I'm just quoting all the studies, not this one in particular. Looking at anything that is preventive is actually quite hard. I'm not going to go into the reasons why, but it's actually quite a hard thing to do, right? So you need huge groups of people to try and prove prevention, and you need to follow them up for a very, very long time to actually make sure that the thing that you think is preventive is actually preventive. And it's quite hard to do with an exercise study, for example, as you can imagine. So most of the data we have is from samples that exist, so from people that are active or inactive or what have you. And also we have studies that look at interventions. So if I am inactive and I am depressed, what happens if I exercise? Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have those two kinds of examples. There is some evidence that suggests that forcing yourself to do physical exercise is preventive. So even if you don't feel like it, if you find a routine, a way to do it, is preventive. But we also know that you might find yourself in this inactive box because you've developed a condition. And we know that some quite effective treatments involve exercise for mental health conditions. So yeah, I mean, but I think from the graph, what you can see that is quite powerful, and we see this in other similar studies, is that there's a big drop. It says there in depression, I don't know why the drop is not so marked in anxiety, because I've seen similar studies which show also quite an important drop between being inactive and completely inactive and starting to walk, right? So you can see it's quite dramatic in depression, and also quite dramatic in what is labeled here as other mental health conditions, right? So you see that there's a good benefit to just starting, getting moving. Seems less marked in chronic anxiety, and as I said, I've seen other studies that show a more in line with the other two. So the graph seems to look more similar to the other two in other studies that I've looked at rather than this one. And you also see that walkers and actives are very similar, yeah. And then you see also another drop for very actives. And again, I think the thing there is a bit nuanced, because to be very active, you are somebody who's very motivated, who has the time, the dedication, the effort, and everything else. So it's hard to say whether it's the being very, very active that is protective, or just the personality traits to lead you to lead you to be very, very active, which are also protective. So there's a bit of nuance there to be teased out. I do think that it has an effect, but I think the takeaway message is that there's a big, big drop between being completely inactive and just doing some physical exercise. And I think that is not just this study, but all the studies as well, kind of align with that view. So if you are going to do anything, you don't need to aim for being extremely active. I think what you need to aim for is just to start that physical activity journey, to try and just be doing a little bit of walking, a little bit of physical activity. That's going to be a dramatic difference from not doing anything. So it's not that big a step, is I suppose is the takeaway message. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And if anyone does want to have a look at the research study, the link is at the bottom of this slide. And when we send that recording out, which we do after all our webinars, you'll be able to access the slides and that study itself. Cool. So this is the point we would welcome some audience participation. So Slido, basically a QR code you can see on the top left of your screen. Scan that, and it should give you the opportunity to contribute to this question. The question we're asking is, how does being physically active impact your mental health? So from your experience, from the people that we've got on the call, what are some of the things that you notice from being physically active and the impact on your mental health? So we've got escape there. We've got, and this might be hinting to some of the, obviously without knowing the individual circumstances, some of the things we mentioned around anxiety, potentially that sort of wanting to flee, maybe exercising, using exercise as a method to do that. Freedom. And if I recall, I can't recall on this, Andreas, whether it's the bigger the writing, the more people have said that thing.
Yes, I think that's it. Yeah.
So yeah,
but also we've got feeling free. So there you go. So yeah, better sleep, is an important one.
Yeah. Peaceful, switching off, feeling alive. Structure, I think, is an interesting one.
Structure is very important. Yeah, I like the one that says feeling of accomplishment, because it is. Yeah. So it makes you feel like you've taken on a challenge and overcome it. Because part of the merit that it has is that it is effortful, that you do have to invest, that is not easy to do. It's actually interesting how that is part of the meaning that you derive from it, the fact that you were able to do something that is actually quite hard to do. That's where that feeling of accomplishment and meaning comes from. There's something else that is maybe it's not music, and running is brilliant. It's a welcome distraction, is a game changer, increased positivity. The one thing that I'm not seeing, which I think is also links in with the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week, is community, because you tend to be more successful, and I'm sure you will comment on this. You tend to be more successful at having physical activity when you have a group of people that you're doing it with. Maybe you're playing football, or you have a sports club of some sort, but also you have a runners club, a cyclists club,
Yeah.
something like that. That is actually really, really motivating. And actually you feel that feel of shared accomplishment is even greater. But also by showing up, you are helping others, motivate others, which also gives you a greater feeling of accomplishment, which I also think gives you an important boost. Um, so you feel that you're connected to all these people, that you're doing something together that is meaningful, but you're also definitely helping the others. You're committed to to stay with them and to sort of join the activity. So therefore, you're a lot more likely to complete that physical activity
Yeah.
because of that commitment to the others. But I said, you know, they're helping you, but you also feel that you're helping others, which is actually something that is very, very important for lifting your mood, feeling more positive, as we said there. But yeah, so that's my comment. But I mean, all of that, all of those things make a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I definitely think there's something in that accountability aspect as well of doing things in groups, right? If you don't turn up, you you might be letting someone down or
you
what
may be
have you.
letting someone down. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Um, so this was just to sort of
Yeah,
make
there
sure
you go.
we
Yeah,
captured what the audience has largely reflected on this slide. I'm thinking social connection you've just mentioned there, Andreas, in terms of
yeah.
community, um, cognitive.
Cognitive function is an interesting one. We know that your cognitive function improves with exercise.
Mm,
And that is probably to do with, again, the signal that you're sending your whole body by doing exercise. Exercise is metabolically expensive. So if you think about humans 100,000 years ago, when calories were scarce were scarce um, uh, in the in the environment. So you had to really find those calories where you could get
mm,
them and hunt for them. Um,
mm,
you had to be sharp and you had to be like with it and you had to be alert. And it seems to really boost your cognitive function, better concentration, longer lasting concentration, more ability to persist on task, things like that.
mm.
We know happen with exercise, which I think derives from that. Derives from it just sends a signal that we need to be alert and on it and sharp, and that so the brain switches on. Those resources are mobilized. Yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting point. Um, I think I slightly reworded this from the last time you saw it, Andreas, but this was our philosophical
Yeah.
sort of discussion, and you've kind of pointed out some of the reasons why we might feel good when we're doing these things, and
Yes.
yeah, a lot of the participation and comments has reflected some of those things that would link into our mood and how we feel about ourselves, whether we're doing things for ourselves or we're being part of a group doing
Yeah.
exercise. And then from the different sort of conditions that we spoke through, potentially if you're feeling more anxious, maybe it's good to kind of complete that cycle. And then
Yeah.
the slightly sort more, would you sort of abstract, this sort of contribution to, if you're not doing something, i.e. being active or moving, then what's your extrapolating it back? What's the kind of purpose? Are you fulfilling a purpose?
Exactly.
And yeah, at a deeper level, we thought it would be interesting to kind of chat about.
Yeah. So I mean, that is just thinking about what the fundamental function of physical activity is physical activity is not there for its own sake. So we develop the ability to move and use tools and you know do things around the house and go out and get resources for our family and our neighbors for a purpose, right? So this ultimately physical activity was necessary for survival. So if you're
Mm,
not if you're not moving around, why is it? You have to ask yourself, so if you're in a situation where you don't need to move around, then no, nobody needs you, maybe. Nobody needs you to be active. So that sends a signal that, what is the point? So you may be a very subconscious level because again, your body and your mind are very much interlinked. So if you're not doing things, then your sense of purpose might be diminished. Um, and actually, doing an intellectual task doesn't have the same signal for your body, because again, remember, your body and your mind are integrated. They're the same thing. And you expect these signals from the environment. So if you are moving around and looking after people, for example, or going out and gathering resources, these are all meaningful activities for you and for your family and for the community, which is ultimately that sends a good signal that tells you it is worth me carrying on. It is worth me doing things. It is worth me,
Mm.
um, pressing on with something that might be quite difficult or energy consuming or tiring, or so it's worth me persisting. So if you're not active, then you might be sending the signal to your body is that there's not much point in you being active. So therefore, I think that is probably what is. If you look at down, we could look at this at a very biological level and look at all the cascade of hormones that happens that send these signals. So you're in this energy saving mode, either because you have to preserve resources and you feel you're in an inescapable situation. So let's imagine again going back 100,000 years ago. If you're not active, then why is it? Is it because you're trying to preserve energy because the resources are scarce, or is it because there is predators out there and you need to protect yourself and you need to hunker down? None of those situations send a good signal, if you know what I mean. So when you're not able to be active and do things, you're probably in a situation that is difficult. You're trying to preserve energy. You're trying to sort of hunker down. You're trying to or maybe nobody needs you, so you're not moving because nobody needs you to move. The problem that we have now is that people may very well be needing us. We may be doing something that is quite meaningful, like for example, we may be working on our computers, but that is not the same as being physically active. That fundamental um, primordial signal that we have
Yeah.
about that may be missing. And given where we are, it might be that we need to supplement it by purposefully doing the exercise. But guess what? We are actually doing something that is quite meaningful by joining those clubs, by doing those activities, by participating with others. We are doing something that we know definitely is going to benefit their health and ours. So it is a meaningful activity in the end. So I without going into the biological cascade of what hormones are involved, you mentioned cortisol, and
Yeah.
we could mention noradrenaline and that axis and what happens there. I think fundamentally, if you look at it from a very human point of view, I think this is partly what might be going on and why doing exercise might feel very meaningful because it kind of
Mm.
is. And in ancient, uh, in our ancestors, it was actually fundamental to life and to survival.
Yeah. It's interesting you walked into that. I've scribbled down on this bit of paper the relationship between having an active job versus a more sedentary office-based job. And
Yes.
those, yeah, obviously there's a myriad of factors that fall into job satisfaction, but it's an interesting
It is, and again, is because other conditions might interfere with it, but just being out there and in contact with nature, people that do that, if you just isolate that experience and you try to control for everything else, they do report that as being quite positive, yes,
okay.
and quite meaningful. Doing something with your hands is something that people say
Yeah.
for good reason.
Good stuff. Slightly contrary to what we said earlier, it's just because there are many things that fall into prevention, right, Andreas? And I know this
Yeah,
is a very topical point, particularly amongst some of our customers,
yeah.
partners we work with. But I wonder if at a broad top line level, we can just give it a flavor of why prevention, it has to be a very personalized thing to that individual. It's not one size fits all, even though physical activity and exercise can be beneficial generally for people.
It can be.
Um, but from a
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I mean, it does. I mean, there's various things that are unhelpful when you're trying to study prevention in terms of being able to make very firm statements about it, if you know what I mean. The main problem is that um, you need to, as I said, you need to get people to do a certain thing and do it consistently for a long time. and then compare it with people not doing it in a similar circumstance, and then follow them up long enough to see whether conditions are going to manifest themselves or not. So it's very hard when conditions are rare. So it's almost impossible when conditions are rare. You need enormous sample sizes to see enough cases to know whether you're preventing any cases, if that makes sense, right? So in depression and anxiety, it is frequent, but you still need observation periods of above 2 years for any intervention. And you do need, if you want to do a lifestyle intervention, you need to make sure that everybody adheres to the lifestyle intervention quite religiously, which is also very hard to do, right? So you're left with looking at what people do and looking at what the outcomes are. So you're not really introducing anything as an experimental intervention, right? So you're just looking at people, what people are doing, and then you end up saying, okay, so people who have this diet seem to live longer. The problem with that is that there might be a million confounders there. It might be because a certain personality type leads you to adopt a certain diet. And it's actually the personality type that prevents whatever it is that we're looking at rather than the diet. You see what I mean? So it's quite hard to sort out what's going on when you're looking at prevention. And that's why it can be very nuanced and very difficult to quantify and very hard to know what does what. We do know a little bit about, I think exercise has good evidence, if you can call it that. Not necessarily from intervention studies, but there's enough of a signal there that you can quite reliably say that exercise is going to be preventative. But as you say, sometimes it boils down to individual risk factors that we do know something about. And it's about understanding those risk factors and eliminating them. Some risk factors are bigger than others. And we know that, for example, some life situations can be very inducive of then later on developing a mental health condition. And understanding those risk factors, like for example, early childhood trauma. I'm just going to throw one out there, and then knowing how to mitigate them might change that outcome. And we do have some data for some of these. But as you say, it can be very, very personal. It can be very much about what risk factors that you have are associated with mental health conditions and which ones we can eliminate. Another example that perhaps is less dramatic is problem sleeping, which may be multifactorial, but we do know that before you develop a mental health conditions, if you do have problem sleeping and we do address them, then we're able to reduce the frequency and severity of mental health conditions. So yes, it can be very, very nuanced. I think I can firmly say, though, that exercise is one of the ones that we have the best evidence for in terms of a generic prevention or preventive factor. Also, having a good social network is another important one, and you can do both in one if you join like a club or something like that. Even dancing can be very preventive. It's a form of exercise, but it's also very social. And we know that can be prevented as well. But it has to be very personal. Yes.
Great stuff. It's a good segue, actually, what you were saying around the individual risk factors. So I just wanted to point out, we always highlight something within the Thrive service, Thrive app, within these webinars, as well as the sort of thematic content that we're discussing. So within our app, those of you that have access to it, about understanding those individual risk factors, we do, again, a confidential service, but we do screenings within the app that allow the technology and you to build awareness of some of those risk factors that might be in play for you as an individual. So whether you're not getting enough sleep, whether you're drinking too much caffeine late at night, maybe you're feeling isolated, and then we make more personalized recommendations to the individual based on those individual risk factors. So as you sort of progress through the app, you open up more sort of depth to the app itself. And these are where these kind of more personalized interventions can be really handy, rather than a more generic sort of find the content for yourself approach. We want to take a very sort of individualized, personalized approach to supporting people. Okay. So community, we've spoken to a degree about this. I think yes, it's the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week. I think there's various ways that physical activity, being connected with people, that doesn't have to mean, playing paddle. Although I have picked that up recently, it seems to be the craze that's sweeping across the UK at the moment. But I think there are various factors that make community an important aspect, but certainly not the only aspect that feeds in and contributes to good mental health. Is there anything we haven't said on community, Andres, from your perspective?
No,
Um,
I think is that is I think is we do know that having that social connection is an important preventive factor, but also we know that if you do have a community that you do these activities with, you're a lot more likely to persist and persevere and actually
yeah.
participate in those activities, even when you're feeling down or low. So we know that at the early stages, for example, of depression, having that community might motivate you to still stay engaged, even if you're not enjoying it so much, and get you over the hump, as it were, without necessarily becoming unwell. So it might actually having that community might actually help you continue with the exercise, continue with that connection, and not lose it, and not end up becoming unwell. Um, so sometimes we're not in control of this at all, and you can do what you can do, right? But
Mm,
yeah, it could be protected.
yeah,
Well, it definitely is. Yeah.
great stuff. Okay. So a couple of things that work for me, and then I'm going to open it out to the audience. So I guess I classify myself. I can't remember the cohorts, but certainly in the active cohort, for me, exercise is really important. I do have a little dog. She was barking in the background then whilst I was on mute. But for me, that's just a simple thing. Now we have a car alarm to contend with. Um, a simple thing that gets me out and about. And I definitely think actually dog ownership walks you into the community aspect because you start chatting to other people that own dogs and everything that comes with that. But I want to make this about the audience and your suggestions and recommendations. So I'm going to click on to the next slide. Hopefully
I
that noise
mean,
is not too
that's
unbearable.
also very personal. For
Yeah.
me, exercise is intensive dysphoric, intensely dysphoric. What I mean by that is that for me, it sucks. I don't get anything good out of it
Yeah.
myself. So I really do have to force myself. So I learned that, doing exercise for the sake of exercise is never going to work for me. Just never.
Mm,
So it is
mm,
exercise with a purpose. I really enjoy, and I do, but I never enjoy the exercise, but I enjoy the thing that I get from doing the exercise. Like for example, going for a walk with somebody, with a member of the family or something like that. Going
mm.
to a nice place, but actually not just walking to it, or
Yeah.
or including not using lifts, just walking up the stairs every time, walking up the escalators in the tube, things like that is the
Yeah.
thing that worked for me. So deliberately avoiding the easy options that can help. A lot of people wearing a tracker, it doesn't work for me, but a lot of people wearing a tracker, it really works. So
Mm.
because it gives you that immediate feedback about what walk with someone I love. That's the one that works for me. Yes.
I like that one. Walk whilst listening to these webinars. I'm just picturing the scene there.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
cool.
listening to something while you walk makes it a lot easier. You say,
Mm,
well, I'm going to take this time to sort of listen to something, and I'm also going to sort of get in my steps, as it were. Yeah,
mm.
fantastic. Yeah. As a social event, that as I said, that works for me. Or, even doing something as stupid as just doing the shopping, but because you have a nearby shop, not taking the car, just I mean maybe say 20 minutes, 30-minute walk, and then you coming back with maybe some bags that just plan for it. You don't need to do a big shop, but just deliberately just going and pick up some things. And yeah, you also do a little bit of strength training because you're carrying some bags. So of course, don't push it, but that can help. Or that's the kind of thing that I find helps me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've got a nice selection of comments here. Quite a few comments around the walking with,
Good
with
weather. Yeah, I mean, if you could only fabricate it, right?
yeah, yeah,
You
right.
can only manufacture it somehow.
Yeah, long
The
may it
dog park is a good one. Yeah.
continue.
Walking meetings. I don't know. I mean, that sounds like an interesting idea. I don't know that.
Yeah, I've had a couple of we've done a couple of those. I think even just on that community theme, we have every week in our sort of customer team or commercial team, we just have a catch up on a Wednesday, and it's not intended to verge into work. Inevitably, sometimes it does, but just having four people, five people, six people that join and chatting, it is a really nice way to stay connected. And it made me think about the theme today. And whilst it's not always super well subscribed to, when people come on and have a chat, it's nice just to connect with people, particularly when you work virtually and remotely. And I'm sure there's many people on here that do that. But yeah, no, there's some great examples there. So thank you for sharing your comments. And I think the next slide will just to reinforce the great ideas that the poll and your contributions have shown. So I'll put them all up in the purposes of time. So yeah, there was there tracking your progress seemed a really popular one actually on that.
Yeah, yes,
We got all the different brands of trackers and
Fitbit
fitness
and everything.
trackers out there. I think for me, finding something that you enjoy is
Yeah.
absolutely key, right? You know, the if you
Or
want this.
linking it to something that you enjoy. Yeah, that works for me. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Alarms, reminders, building it into your routine. So just, exploring, sometimes when things are on top of you, it can feel like you haven't got time to do that. But if you really examine what you're doing, where you're going, for example, if you work in your city or whatever, is the gym on the way? You could do walk to work rather than getting on the bus. There's various things that if you really put your mind to it, and I guess I put motivational interviewing in there, but that's quite hard to do because it's derived from therapy, right? I
It
believe.
is. It's absolutely, yeah. It originally was developed in addictions, actually.
Yeah, yeah, but it is used, if you work with a decent personal trainer, they will try and
Yes.
unpack for you what's going on. Why is that important to you? What is it about that thing? What's that going to make you feel? So some of these questions you can kind of ask yourself a bit of introspective self-reflection because I think you do need a why, whatever that
Yeah.
is.
Why does this matter? And I think
Yeah,
we hopefully we gave you a few reasons, plus your own. Yeah. Um,
great stuff. All right. I think that brings us to the end of the session. We do have the chat feature. I know we're just about on time with closing at one. This is a new session for us, so it's always a bit see how it runs in the actual webinar. But if there are any kind of comments that you want to leave in the chat, please do. If you have any sort of questions, then pop them in there. But otherwise, yeah, big thank you to everyone that's made the time to join. Hopefully today's been a good session. Welcome feedback. Can you share the Thrive QR again? I can. He says, one sec. Let's see if we can go back. Yeah. Now you see where all the animations come into the slides. Let's roll through. You will get as well the recording of the session. And if you are having any trouble accessing the app, he says, here we go. Cool. Let's have a look. You should have it there.
yeah.
Working
Just
time.
one last thing to say that exercise has been proven to be independently a treatment for anxiety, for depression in particular, but anxiety and depression. The evidence is quite strong for depression as a treatment.
Right.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And there's one modality of therapy called behavioral activation that heavily relies on it.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, and it's quite successful. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. We'll call it there today. Yeah, thank you for joining and have a good rest of your afternoon and week. Cheers.